Hello and welcome to the Business Standards Morning Show. I'm Kanishka Gupta, and here is a look at the stories for the day. Just like the world, India too caught its breath and figured out the next course of action as Russian troops stormed into Ukrainian cities early Thursday. The Indian government is now scrambling all the resources to evacuate its 20,000 citizens from the Eastern European country, whose airspace has been shut since the offensive. Apart from this, the war will also have its economic consequences too. Our next report offers some peek into all this.
As one air siren after another went off in almost every big city of Ukraine, including its capital, their echo was heard worldwide. Apart from the humanitarian consequences of the war, the world will also have to bear its economic costs. About 4,000 km away in India, the benchmark stock indices suffered their worst day in a year on Thursday. They fell 4.8%. Oil prices breached $100 a barrel for the first time since 2014, which is perhaps India's biggest macroeconomic challenge. This came after Russia launched an invasion of Ukraine and carried out missile strikes on its infrastructure. As the world's third largest importer of oil, India relies on other countries for more than 80% of its crude oil requirements. The global price benchmark for crude oil, Brent, hit $105 a barrel after yesterday's events. This could push India's oil import bill, worsening its external position. Higher oil prices aggravate India's inflation, widen the current account deficit, and put pressure on the rupee. The rupee weakened 1.5% to 75.65 against the dollar on Thursday. It could also force RBI to reconsider its accommodative stance. With Indian companies already reeling with surging input costs, higher oil prices and in turn higher fuel costs will exacerbate the situation across the board. Depending on the category and product type, up to 50% of an FMCG company's raw material basket can be linked to crude oil. Crude oil and its derivatives are used in making detergents, soaps, and cosmetics. Cement, paint, airline, and tire companies will also be impacted. Economist Yuvika Singhal tells us more about the consequences that Russia's actions will have on the Indian economy in the short term.
In our opinion, the Russia-Ukraine crisis could have a multidimensional impact on the Indian economy. And to a large extent, this depends on how long the current tensions that we are seeing continue to simmer. The primary manifestation of this or any other geopolitical unrest would be on India's inflation as the first line of impact. In our own estimates, a $10 per barrel rise in India crude basket adds nearly about 20 basis points to CPI inflation directly. Now, the government does have the buffer of reducing excise duties on petrol and diesel. A 5 rupee reduction on petrol and diesel could assuage or provide an inflation relief of about 8 to 10 basis points. And that is where I think the jugglery of the government would essentially be, because they would have to balance the inflation reprieve against fiscal costs. A 5 rupee reduction could cost the exchequer as much as 60,000 crores in loss of excise duties that it could have collected. Our own estimates suggest that a 10 barrel per barrel increase in India crude oil basket could have an impact of widening the current account deficit by almost 50 to 60 basis points as a percentage of GDP. What we are expecting is that from a level of close to about 1.5% of current account deficit in FY22, we could see widening of current account deficit by about a percentage in FY23. So from a balance of payments perspective, from a very comfortable surplus of close to about $43 billion in FY22, we could see our BOP surplus deteriorate into single digits in FY23. And that too, in our minds, will be a big evaporation of support to the rupee. We ourselves are looking at a number of, in a range of 76 to 77 on rupee over the course of the next 3 months. While we do see depreciation pressures on rupee, we do not see runaway rupee depreciation pressures to the kind we saw in 2013.
Both Russia and Ukraine are not major trading partners of India, but certain sectors and commodities could feel the heat. The two-way trade between India and Ukraine was $3.1 billion in 2021. India's exports to Ukraine stood at $510 million, with pharma products making up 32% of it. Other exports include telecom instruments, iron and steel, agrochemicals, coffee, etc. India imported goods worth $2.6 billion from Ukraine last year, $1.8 billion of which is vegetable oils, mainly sunflower oil. Ukraine alone accounts for 70% of India's sunflower oil imports. Any supply disruption will raise the prices of sunflower oil as India meets over 60% of its edible oil needs through imports, and sunflower oil accounts for 14% of India's edible oil imports. Meanwhile, bilateral trade between India and Russia stood at $11.9 billion in 2021. India exported $3.3 billion worth goods, and once again, pharmaceutical products were the largest export commodity at $542 million. Other top exports include electronics, iron and steel, tea, and auto components. India's imports from Russia last year were $8.6 billion. Major imports were crude oil, petroleum products, coal, fertilizers, gold, precious stones, and precious metals. Russia is India's biggest arms supplier, delivering half of the total arms imports. The United States and Europe have promised the toughest sanctions on Russia. Ajay Sahai of the Federation of Indian Export Organizations tells more.
So far, what we've been given to understand that sanction has been put on many banks in Russia by US and UK. European Union may follow the suit, and since India's trade to Russia also happens in dollar, there may be restriction coming on the SWIFT also. We have to see what kind of sanctions are brought on the Russian banks, whether trade in US dollar is permitted or not, whether there is any cooling off period which is available. But one thing is very clear, that since now we are very much globally integrated, if any kind of conflict happen in any part of the world, it is likely to impact the global trade and the global economy. We have seen its impact on the global crude prices. There is no sanction or restriction which has come on Ukraine, but once we have a conflict in the region, definitely logistics challenges are also added. And we've been given to understand that many of the ship companies have asked that if the ships are moving to the Black Sea, then they need to inform, because the underwriter or the insurers would like to have a very closer look on such sailing. There are restrictions which has come on the ships which are under the Russian flags also. So not a good development, and this has probably come at the worst time when we are just looking into coming out of the COVID.
In addition to the impact on India's economy and trade, the Ukraine crisis has a direct impact on thousands of Indian citizens. Over 18,000 students from India are in Ukraine studying medicine or engineering, forming roughly 24% of total international students there. A few hundred of them returned before Ukraine closed its airspace to civilians on Thursday. From evacuation of Indian students to managing inflation and other economic consequences from the fallout of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the government has a rocky road ahead.
Back home, the India's largest bourse, National Stock Exchange, is at the center of a controversy. And at the heart of that controversy is a mysterious yogi everyone is talking about now. Chitra Ramakrishna, a founding member of NSE who was at the helm between 2013 and 2016, has told investigators probing alleged irregularities during her tenure that she was being guided by the mystic who lived in Himalayas. But did that mystic really live in the Himalayas, or was he moving around in the plush exchange office of Mumbai? Our next report offers a peek into both the sides of the argument.
Let us first briefly go through what the controversy is. Chitra Ramakrishna was appointed Joint MD of NSE in 2009 and was promoted to CEO in 2013. Besides playing a key role at NSE, she was also closely involved with the team that put in place a framework to set up the Securities and Exchange Board of India. After she took over as Chief Executive, NSE's daily average turnover including both cash and derivatives, doubled to 3.5 trillion rupees from 1.6 trillion rupees in the 3.5 years. But now the flip side. In February 2022, the Securities and Exchange Board of India charged Ramakrishna and other NSE officials for alleged governance lapses and for violating securities contract rules in the hiring at the senior levels. This was associated with the appointment of Anand Subramanian as the Chief Strategic Advisor and his redesignation as Group Operating Officer and Advisor to MD. Subramanian, a mid-level official in one of Balmer Lorry's subsidiaries in Calcutta, suddenly became Ramakrishna's principal advisor. He moved into the office with all the authority and had access to all the information at the high security exchange. And when questioned, Ramakrishna told the probe agency that she did all this on the directions of a yogi, which were passed on to her through an email. Now, according to a letter written by former NSE chairman Ashok Chawla to the Securities and Exchange Board of India, the mysterious Himalayan yogi could be none other than Anand Subramanian. Subramanian was Group Operating Officer of the NSE and advisor to Ramakrishna during 2015-16. He joined as Chief Strategic Advisor in April 2013. Chawla's letter, dated July 6, 2018, and addressed to Madhavi Puri Butch, former whole-time member of SEBI, provides evidence of why Subramanian was behind the email address rig.yajursama@outlook.com, which the latest SEBI order says belongs to an unknown person. According to the letter, which has been reviewed by Business Standard, the Skype accounts in the name of Anand.Subramanian9 and Sironmoney.10, which were found on Mr. Subramanian's NSE desktop, were configured in the Skype application database and linked to the email ID rigyajursama@outlook.com and the mobile number used by Mr. Subramanian. Further, the Word documents sent from the said email ID show the author as Subramanian, and the difference between the time of creation of documents and the time of email attachments was only a few minutes. Also, images sent from the email ID had a geotag of the address of Subramanian's Chennai residence. It mentioned the email ID rigyajursama@outlook.com showed a booking made at Umaid Bhavan Palace around the same time Subramanian's bank statement showed payment of around 2.4 lakh rupees made to the hotel. In a reply to a query by Business Standard, Chawla said, "The basis of my letter was an EY forensic audit. I have nothing to say." The SEBI order issued this month also stated that a forensic investigation by EY had concluded that the unknown person was Subramanian. Interestingly, on June 20, 2018, NSE board members Dinesh Kanabar and Prakash Parthasarathy grilled Ramakrishna about the identity of the unknown person with whom she exchanged correspondence. The former NSE CEO told them that she believed the person was a Siddha Purusha who had no physical persona and could materialize at will. According to the letter, Ramakrishna told the NSE board members that the confidential information shared by her wasn't used for personal or monetary gains. She further told them that while she took guidance from the spiritual person, all her decisions in the course of her work were her alone. SEBI whole-time member Anant Barua, however, has held that the report doesn't provide conclusive finding that Subramanian was the unknown person. Legal experts said SEBI orders are quasi-judicial in nature, where the adjudicating officer has the liberty to conclude one way or the other based on the evidence. After whistleblower complaints against Subramanian emerged in 2015, SEBI wrote to the NSE on 3 occasions between March 2016 and September 2016, seeking an explanation. The NSE, which was then headed by Ramakrishna, was evasive. This prompted SEBI to send 3 more reminders in October, November, and December. Finally, in November 2017, the exchange's Nomination and Remuneration Committee submitted a detailed report. SEBI then embarked upon a tedious exercise of going through voluminous documents of the NSE's board meetings, internal committee meetings, and HR records for a period between 2013 and 2016 to establish lapses and fix responsibility at the NSE. Ramakrishna's email correspondence to the unknown person came to SEBI's notice only in 2018. In 2019, SEBI composed a detailed examination report. Within months, it issued show-cause notices to the NSE, Ramakrishna, Subramanian, and former MD and CEO Ravi Narayan, and 2 others. The regulator then had to provide hearing opportunities to all the individuals. The process was further delayed by the outbreak of COVID-19. The final order in the matter culminated in February 2022.
Meanwhile, the Russia invasion led to a bloodbath on Dalal Street. Global financial markets were rattled too. While most equity markets across the globe corrected sharply, Brent crude oil hit the psychological level of $100 a barrel. Now, these developments, along with other headwinds, have kept the markets choppy in the February FNO series, which turned out to be one of the most volatile series since April 2021 FNO expiry. Now, will the March series be equally volatile? What should your strategy be in this backdrop? Let's find out in our next segment.
The February series was one of the most volatile series since April 2021 expiry, NSE data shows, with the average daily swing for the NSE Nifty 50 index as high as 1.4%, average difference between the day's high and low. Such levels were seen back in April 2021 series when the average daily swing rose to 1.55%, and earlier in the March 2021 FNO series when the swing was as high as 1.77%. The mean average for the last 12 months FNO expiry has been 1.19%, with July 2021 series as the least volatile with a daily average swing of 0.77%. The Nifty 50 index has slipped over 4% in February FNO series to 16,200 levels. So what does this mean, and how should you approach the March FNO series that begins today? Analysts expect the March series to be choppy as well, given the multiple headwinds that the markets face. At the fundamental level, foreign portfolio investors remain extremely uncomfortable with India's valuation premium, analysts have said, and have sold nearly $11 billion worth of stocks over the past 6 months. In the next few weeks, the India equity market may remain choppy and offer good entry opportunities on large corrections, Credit Suisse Wealth Management suggests investors focus on domestic cyclical companies such as banks, cement and staffing companies, apart from reopening trades including multiplexes. The major risk can come from oil shock for Indian equities as reopening of the global economy may spur demand, Credit Suisse Wealth Management. The markets will keep a close tab on the ongoing tussle between Russia and Ukraine. Analysts point at keeping a close eye on the consequential sanctions impacting businesses with Russia and any spillover of the impact on the neighboring European countries. On the positive side, a peace deal could send stocks soaring across the globe. Equity markets always react in a magnified manner to the initial events and finally adjust to the fundamental consequences of the event. Global equities, including the Indian markets, may fall another 2 to 3% from the current levels and would start adjusting for the perceived eventual consequences thereafter. G. Chokalingam, founder and CIO, Economics Research. After a few weeks, the war either would stop or continue as a proxy war for a longer duration. The global equities would adjust for these eventual consequences within 2 or 3 weeks. G. Chokalingam, founder and CIO, Economics Research. As a fallout of the geopolitical situation, rising crude oil prices are proving to be another sore point for global equity markets, especially India, that imports around 80% of its crude oil requirement. Brent crude broke above the $100 mark in trade on Thursday after Russia ordered troops to invade eastern Ukraine. With global economies battling inflation, soaring oil prices can further fuel inflation and in turn disturb the fiscal math. If the prices remain elevated for long, it will have an impact on corporate earnings growth across some sectors as well over the next few quarters. Another global development to keep an eye out for is US Federal Reserve meeting on March 15th and 16th. According to experts, the markets so far seem to have factored in a 25 basis point rate hike by the US Fed, and any disparity in expectations could result in a knee-jerk reaction for the markets. At the domestic level, the outcome of the ongoing assembly polls across 5 states, including Uttar Pradesh, Punjab to be announced on March 10, will be keenly watched. Although there may not be a direct correlation between the elections and markets, any favorable verdict for BJP in non-ruling states such as Punjab and Manipur could boost the sentiment. Lastly, financial year-end portfolio rebalancing by DIIs and retail investors who have mostly been net buyers across fiscal 2021-22 may want to book profits towards the financial year end. Let us now go to Gaurang Shah, Senior Vice President at Geojit Financial Services, to understand how investors should navigate through this uncertain phase for the markets.
These are the levels, Puneet, we had touched a couple of times. December 20th, 2021, we made a low of 16,600. Before that, August and September 2021, we were at 50s, same levels, 16,500, 16,400. So barring the short-term, medium-term, concerns, I think earnings, if you go by, and the outlook, these are great times for long-term investors to get into the market. There could be choppiness, volatility, depending upon what the news flow is, but I don't think the markets keep on reacting to the same news flow again and again. Sectors like, paint companies, FMCG companies, tire manufacturing companies, aviation companies, FMCG companies to a certain extent. Wherever you have some crude playing its role in the input cost, there you might see a little bit of downtick on the earnings front. But, it depends how much of oil we import from Russia, oil and gas, and how much we import from the other part of the world. The price hike on petrol and diesel remains to be seen when the government decides to hike. But in terms of percentage, I don't think there's going to be a serious impact on the earnings front.
On Friday, the markets will continue to keep a tab on the developing geopolitical situation and its impact across key asset classes. Stock-specific movement based on news flow is also likely.
Markets are eagerly waiting the IPO of government-owned Life Insurance Corporation of India, or LIC. But even before it hits the primary market, LIC filed a draft red herring prospectus with the Securities and Exchange Board of India. Our next report tells more about this document and why it is filed.
All the information about companies which are listed on stock exchanges is in public domain for everyone to see. But what about the companies which are not listed? So before any company goes for an IPO to raise money and hits the primary market, it comes out with a draft red herring prospectus. This document is filed with Market Regulator Securities and Exchange Board of India and is also known as offer document or preliminary registration document. Draft Red Herring Prospectus, or DRHP in short, serves as a crucial communication link between the company and its investors and shareholders. Through the DRHP, the issuer firm allows potential investors to make an informed decision and analyze its financials, issuance objectives, business operations, promoter holding, market valuation, and other important information. This draft tells the reasons for the IPO. It informs about the risks involved and how the company will spend the money raised from the primary market. Some of the important DRHP details include balance sheet, earnings statement, net proceeds, legal opinion of the listings, and underwriting documents copy. However, it does not include the amount of issue and details of the price or number of shares being offered. The DRHP of a company is available on the official websites of the issuing company, SEBI, merchant bankers, and stock exchanges. Firm planning to go public delegates a merchant banker to prepare the DRHP. The SEBI analyzes the DRHP and recommends changes, if required, and then gives a go-ahead when the suggested amendments are made according to its guidelines. After the approval from SEBI, Registrar of Companies, and the stock exchanges, Bombay Stock Exchange and the National Stock Exchange, the DRHP converts into a red herring prospectus, or RHP, which is also known as final prospectus. An RHP document comprises additional details of the issue, the number of shares offered, and the face value.
An analyst at Jefferies India recently told a Business Daily that LIC IPO has the potential to disrupt market balance. That's all for today. We will be back with more news and analysis on our next episode. Stay tuned and thank you for watching. If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.